Magic is one of those things where digital tools really come in handy, and a good practice for getting the hang of tools and options that are exclusive to digital. Magic is also just a cool thing to add to your illustrations and concepts for a bit of extra fun and flair, so here are some tips and tricks I have for it. Since we're working with fiction, there's a lot of room for creativity, although a good place to start is with real-world reference. Fire is a pretty common and generic reference for how magic is shown visually, but it does work well. Others could be water for something flowy, electric lights for rune-type magic, and these other things I've listed here. Some, like oil, are the types of starting points that are more out there and would likely lead to a bit more originality. While you're figuring this out, it's also really important to think about what this magic is supposed to do. If it's for fighting, it might look dangerous and sharp. If it's instead used for other, maybe harmless purposes, like navigating or healing, it will probably need to look very different. I've made this list of different potential magic uses that you're welcome to pull from. A lot of this intention in magic design comes across in the motion it has. Even if you aren't animating it, you should make it clear in a single image how it might be moving. A person should be able to look at what you've made and at least be able to make a good guess at the speed of the motion, and overall be able to imagine what it would look like if it were animated. The illusion of speed in a still illustration can be created by how you design shapes. Take this circle for example. Since it's the same shape and thickness on all sides, it doesn't seem to have any direction to it, and so you can only really see it as moving very slowly, if at all. Just by tweaking it a little bit, weighting it more on one side, it already starts to have a sense of motion to it. For a shape to feel in motion, it should first have varying thickness. Here's a much more clear example. There are parts of this shape that are very thin, and parts that are very thick. Having incredibly thin parts of a shape makes it feel like it's moving so fast that it might break apart, and you can break it apart, as well as add some secondary shapes into the mix. Don't forget to use a combination of big shapes, medium shapes, and small shapes for the most appealing design. Once basic shapes are done, there's still a lot more you can do to make this look finished and convincing. For magic that emits light, I recommend picking out an area to make the brightest, which I'll call the core. Where you put it is pretty much up to you, and the area surrounding it will likely have transparency. This is pretty easy to achieve by removing some opacity with a soft eraser, creating a simple gradient into the core. If your program has the option to add an outer glow to the lines and shapes you draw, try adding that as well. If you don't have this option, you can make a new layer underneath and then add this glow by hand. At this point, I'd say this is a good level of detail and complexity for animation, but we can still go a lot further with it. Blur filters are another thing that your program hopefully has. A slight Gaussian blur can soften up the edges here, and a motion blur can really sell that this thing is moving. Again, if your program doesn't have this, you could potentially do this by hand with some sort of blending or smudging tool, but it might be time to get a better program, because blurring options are incredibly useful. From here, you can try stacking different shapes and effects to figure out what you like. It's fun to try different shape and color combinations and see what you end up with. Like I did here for example, there is the blue, more flowing shape underneath, and then the yellow, electric-like shapes on top. When layering like this, I recommend starting with more simple and soft shapes, and then working your way up to sharper, crisper, and more detailed shapes on top. This allows these sharper shapes to pop out nicely. A lot of my examples have had the surrounding glow of the magic be less bright than the shape itself, but you might prefer the reverse instead. For this example, I've made the inside of the shape mostly transparent, with a brighter outer glow. To make the core extra bright, make a new layer set to a blending mode like color dodge, and then you can add a brighter punch of light with a soft airbrush. For final touches, you may want to paint in some fine and subtle detail, in this case some lines inside the shape that are visible in the transparent areas. Be sure to add a very slight blur to these details if they end up too sharp looking compared with everything else. I wanted to give some of my earlier ideas a try, so here's that as well. Once you've got the hang of drawing and painting more generic type magic, there's a lot of ways you can branch out and really have fun with it. Hopefully, this will give you some ideas of what directions you could go. I think there's a lot of untapped potential in ways to visualize magic that intend to be used. Play around with different brushes, maybe make your own, and you might end up with something really cool and unique. This video on screen should help if you're painting magic into a scene with a character and want it to reflect in their eyes or other reflective surfaces. Thanks for watching!